we were perfectly willing and anxious to work with the police to find the killer. We had a higher priority at that point, and that was to bury our daughter.
The family is flying the body back to Atlanta for burial.
John and Patsy Ramsey have consistently maintained their innocence, yet for nearly 3 decades, their conduct has been subject to intense scrutiny. It is unusual for a family to remain under a cloud of suspicion for such a prolonged period, unless there are significant unresolved questions. This begs the analytical question: why has this specific case, the tragic death of a child, become so inextricably linked to the names John and Patsy Ramsey? It prompts a closer examination of their actions on the night in question and what information might have been concealed. Within the family unit, one might question if there was a primary orchestrator of the events that followed. Before we analyze the suspicions in the case, please tell me where you saw this video from. I will read it all and spread it to the world. The JonBenét Ramsey case, one of America's most perplexing modern mysteries, revolves around physical evidence and circumstances that have focused suspicion on John Ramsey, raising questions about his potential role in the events or a subsequent cover-up. Furthermore, it appears John's involvement may have been more complex than that of a sole contributor. A central piece of evidence is the ransom note, an unusually long 3-page document discovered on the staircase. Written on paper, and with a pen sourced from within the Ramsey home, it even included a draft, suggesting the author was familiar with the environment. The note's demand for $118,000 was almost identical to a recent work bonus John had received, implying insider knowledge. Handwriting analysis could not exclude Patsy Ramsey as the author, whilst it cleared both John and their son, Burke. Linguistic experts noted what appeared to be deliberate errors and over 200 similarities to Patsy's known writing, fueling speculation that the note was staged. John's provision of the notepad to investigators, an act some found unusually cooperative, suggests he may have sought to shift the focus towards Patsy, aligning with theories that he orchestrated a cover-up to deflect scrutiny. The garrote, crafted from Patsy's paintbrush and a nylon cord, further connects the incident to household items, indicating the perpetrator's familiarity with the home. The complex knots used in its construction suggest a particular skill, which contrasts sharply with the amateurish nature of the ransom note, complicating the narrative of an external intruder. Pineapple found in JonBenét's digestive system contradicted claims from John and Patsy that she had gone to bed immediately after returning from a Christmas party. A bowl containing pineapple, found in the kitchen, bore Burke's fingerprints, suggesting JonBenét had a snack before her death, possibly sparking an altercation. This discrepancy in the timeline, particularly John's assertion that JonBenét was asleep, casts doubt on his account and supports theories of a family-related incident that John may have sought to conceal. JonBenét's remains, discovered by John himself in the basement, provide critical but controversial evidence. She was found covered with a white blanket, with tape over her mouth and her hands bound. Around her neck was the garrote. The scene suggested deliberate staging. John's actions, carrying his daughter upstairs, removing the tape, and disturbing the scene, severely compromised the integrity of the evidence. This was considered an unusual response for a grieving parent and drew suspicion from investigators like Detective Linda Arndt. Arndt noted that John held JonBenét in a way she found unnatural, with her head above his and her body extended, rather than in a typical protective embrace, suggesting a possible emotional detachment or an intent to obscure evidence. The post-mortem examination revealed indications of prior harm of a sensitive nature, hinting at a period of abuse. There was also evidence that the area had been wiped clean, possibly to remove incriminating traces. Unconfirmed reports of fibers matching John's shirt being found in JonBenét's underwear, though never presented in court, intensified speculation of his direct involvement, despite their lack of official corroboration. The presence of unidentified male DNA on JonBenét's clothing complicates theories of the family's guilt. A 2016 forensic analysis suggested this DNA might have originated from two individuals, adding further ambiguity. Whilst this evidence supports an intruder theory, it does not fully absolve John, as it is conceivable he could have staged the scene to exploit such potential findings. The basement window, which John claimed to have broken months earlier and found open on the morning of December 26th before closing it, conflicts with police reports. Both Officer French and family friend Fleet White noted no open window upon their arrival. This contradiction suggests John may have fabricated the detail to bolster an intruder narrative, which would align with a cover-up hypothesis. Additional physical evidence raises further questions. A boot print from a high-tech brand shoe found near JonBenét's remains and not matching any family footwear is often cited as evidence of an intruder. Yet John's failure to report this during his search of the basement fuels speculation that he either ignored it or planted it to mislead investigators. Similarly, a Caucasian pubic hair found on the blanket supports the idea of an outsider, but is complicated by the fact that John's handling of the blanket could have led to contamination. A flashlight on the kitchen counter, which some investigators speculated might have been the instrument used to cause the severe cranial trauma, bore no forensic traces, but suggests the perpetrator was familiar with the home. A rope in a nearby bedroom, which the Ramseys did not claim, adds to intruder theories, but raises the question of why John might have overlooked it during his search. Suspected stun gun marks on JonBenét's body, a theory endorsed by some but disputed by forensic pathologist Dr. Werner Spitz, imply a specialized tool not found in the home. However, their presence could also suggest access by a family member. These physical clues, combined with John's actions, paint a complex picture. The ransom note and garrote, tied to household items, suggest insider involvement. John's disturbance of the scene and his inconsistent account of the window point towards possible staging, the indications of prior harm, hint at a motive to conceal abuse, though the unidentified DNA challenges direct culpability. The Ramseys' lack of immediate cooperation, delaying formal police interviews for several months, and calling 911 despite the note's warning, alongside no signs of forced entry or footprints in the snow, intensifies suspicions of a family cover-up. Theories, including one positing that Burke accidentally caused the fatal injury during a dispute over pineapple, suggest John may have orchestrated the scene to protect his son. Despite these implications, the unidentified DNA and a lack of conclusive proof keep the matter of John's role ambiguous, leaving the case mired in suspicion. It is curious that discussion often returns to John Ramsey, when considering that for Patsy or Burke, there is evidence that could be seen as more directly linking them to JonBenét's death. For Patsy, there are the handwriting similarities with the ransom note and the use of household items to stage the scene. For Burke, there is the theory surrounding a dispute over food and the possibility of an accidental injury. With John, however, there is no such clear, direct forensic link. His unusual actions, the way he carried JonBenét's remains, his disturbance of the crime scene, and his initial lack of cooperation, could be interpreted as attempts to protect his family. Yet, these actions were so conspicuous that they arguably strengthen the theory that Patsy or Burke might be responsible, with John being unwilling to allow his wife or son to face the consequences. However, given John Ramsey's influence and resources as a successful businessman, he could likely have found quieter, more discreet ways to manage the situation. The fact that he allowed the scene to become so chaotic, with an elaborate ransom note and actions that complicated the investigation, suggests a need for a loud, distracting narrative to conceal something else. What might John have been trying to hide? As for Patsy, there are compelling reasons to examine her role, from the ransom note to her behavior during the emergency call, which warrant further exploration. Regarding motives, Patsy's psychological state on the night of December 25, 1996, was likely one of intense stress, stemming from a demanding holiday schedule and preparations for a family trip. As a mother managing JonBenét's high-profile pageant activities, she faced relentless pressure to uphold a perfect family image. Her history as a cancer survivor, having been diagnosed with ovarian cancer in 1993, likely heightened her emotional fragility, potentially making her more susceptible to distress under the holiday strain. Investigators like Steve Thomas hypothesized that Patsy may have acted impulsively, possibly triggered by a minor incident such as JonBenét eating pineapple or a bedwetting episode, which could have escalated into a volatile outburst, leading to the fatal head injury. Some have speculated that Patsy's intense focus on JonBenét's pageant career masked underlying jealousy. As a former beauty queen herself, it is theorized she might have resented the attention her daughter received, potentially sparking an emotional crisis. This theory, though speculative, suggests a motive rooted in a sudden loss of control, amplified by her psychological state and the pressures of maintaining a flawless public facade. Jon Ramsey's potential motives are considered equally complex, primarily centered on suggestions he may have been covering up prior harm to protect his reputation. The post-mortem examination indicated injuries of a sensitive nature on JonBenét, dating from approximately 7 to 10 days before her death. This finding fueled speculation that John had a powerful motive to conceal such information to avoid severe legal and social repercussions. As the CEO of Access Graphics, with a recent bonus reflecting his high standing in Boulder's elite community, John faced immense pressure to maintain a pristine public image. A scandal involving such allegations would have been devastating to his career and social status, providing a strong incentive to stage the scene, for instance, by crafting the ransom note or using the garrote to mislead investigators. Unverified online discussions have suggested John exhibited controlling or secretive behavior, potentially linked to prior inappropriate conduct, though no concrete evidence beyond the autopsy findings supports this. The hypothesis that harm was inflicted upon both JonBenét and her 9-year-old brother Burke emerges from the work of investigator James Kohler and online speculation, positing that family dysfunction drove the cover-up. However, it must be stressed that no forensic evidence, such as DNA or medical records, confirms any harm to Burke, making this aspect highly speculative. A shared motive for both John and Patsy may have been the protection of their son, Burke, and the family's reputation. Some investigators, notably Kohler, suggest an altercation involving Burke, possibly striking JonBenét during a dispute over pineapple, triggered a family crisis, prompting a joint cover-up to shield him from legal consequences. The discovery of pineapple in JonBenét's digestive system, which contradicted the Ramseys' claim that she went to bed immediately, supports this theory, as does the presence of Burke's fingerprints on a kitchen bowl. John and Patsy's unified actions, such as delaying police interviews and inviting friends to the house after the emergency call, suggest a coordinated effort to control the narrative, possibly to protect Burke or conceal other matters. The ransom note, demanding John's exact bonus amount and written on household paper, further implies insider involvement, with John potentially orchestrating the staging to divert suspicion. Yet, the presence of unidentified male DNA on JonBenét's clothing and the garrote, which did not match any Ramsey family member, complicates these motives. This evidence supports an intruder theory, and led to the family's 2008 exoneration by District Attorney Mary Lacey. Although the absence of forced entry and John's questionable actions, like disturbing the scene, keep suspicions alive. Following the events of December 26, 1996, John and Patsy Ramsey employed strategic measures to manage the intense media scrutiny that enveloped them. Recognizing the power of public perception, they swiftly hired a formidable team of lawyers and public relations experts to shape the narrative. This team worked diligently to promote the theory of an intruder, emphasizing evidence like the unidentified DNA to deflect suspicion. By carefully controlling the story, they aimed to counter the media's portrayal of them as suspects, positioning themselves as victims of a tragic crime. The Ramseys understood that an aggressive media campaign could mitigate the damage caused by rampant speculation. To further shield themselves, John and Patsy adopted a deliberate approach of limiting public appearances, avoiding frequent interviews to reduce the risk of being misquoted or facing questions that could undermine their position. When they did engage with the press, they relied on meticulously prepared statements to assert their innocence and reinforce the intruder theory. By maintaining a low profile and speaking only through controlled channels, they ensured their narrative remained consistent. Beyond these direct strategies, their legal team played a pivotal role, issuing carefully worded releases that highlighted the unidentified DNA evidence, reinforcing the notion of an external perpetrator and diverting attention from the family. Years later, after their 2008 exoneration, John Ramsey used media platforms to criticize the Boulder police for their failure to pursue advanced DNA analysis, a tactic that shifted blame onto the authorities and redirected public pressure. Their interactions with the investigation also indirectly influenced public perception. For instance, their decision to invite friends to the house shortly after Patsy's 5:52 a.m. emergency call contaminated the scene, complicating the police's ability to collect pristine evidence. This move, whether intentional or not, fueled media debates about investigative mishandling. Additionally, John's prompt handover of the notepad used for the ransom note was perceived by some as an attempt to steer suspicion toward Patsy, subtly shaping the media's focus. Their legal team's alleged informal meetings with the district attorney further suggest efforts to influence the investigation's direction, which in turn affected media narratives. These combined strategies enabled the Ramseys to navigate the media storm while maintaining a carefully curated image of innocence. In this case, the question of whether John and Patsy formed a tacit agreement to cover up the circumstances surrounding JonBenét's death remains a contentious aspect. Their initial statements displayed a striking unity. Both insisted JonBenét was asleep upon returning home and that Burke remained in bed. This narrative, however, clashed with physical evidence, as the pineapple found in JonBenét's system and Burke's fingerprints on a bowl contradicted their claims. This consistency, despite evident discrepancies, suggests a coordinated effort to shape the story. Further evidence of coordinated action emerged immediately after Patsy's emergency call, when John promptly contacted friends, inviting them to the house. Their presence led to contamination of the scene, indicating a shared strategy to control the situation. Such coordination hints at an implicit understanding between John and Patsy. One hypothesis posits that John, with his calculated demeanor, manipulated a distraught Patsy into participating in a cover-up, such as writing the ransom note or staging the scene, to protect the family's reputation or conceal alleged prior harm. However, counter-arguments challenge the existence of a deliberate pact. No direct evidence confirms a clear agreement. Their actions could reflect a natural response to panic. The unidentified male DNA bolsters the intruder theory, and the district attorney's 1999 decision not to pursue the grand jury's recommendation for charges suggests insufficient evidence of collusion. It remains an open question whether their actions were born of a premeditated agreement or the chaotic response of a traumatized family. Based on an interpretation of the evidence, one can construct a hypothetical scenario. On the night of December 25, 1996, after the family returned home, Burke, unable to sleep, went downstairs for a snack of pineapple. JonBenét joined him, and the two then went to the basement to play. Known for behavioral issues, Burke, in a moment of frustration, may have grabbed a nearby flashlight and struck his sister. Alarmed when she became unresponsive, he panicked and ran to his parents. Patsy, frantic, summoned John. They sent Burke to his room with strict instructions to claim he slept through the night. John, assessing the situation, may have realized that an official examination could reveal signs of prior harm, which he feared would implicate him. To protect himself, he may have devised a plan, stage a kidnapping to deflect suspicion, but ensure the evidence pointed primarily to Patsy. He could have convinced a hysterical Patsy that Burke's accidental blow would destroy their family, leveraging her distress to secure her agreement to a cover-up. Unaware of his potential ulterior motive, Patsy may have been instructed to write a ransom note using household paper and referencing John's bonus. The note's flaws could have been deliberate oversights John allowed, knowing they would incriminate her. While Patsy wrote, this theory suggests John acted alone in the basement, inflicting further injuries of a sensitive nature using one of Patsy's paintbrushes, expecting an autopsy would attribute any such findings to this staged act, not realizing prior harm would still be distinguishable. He then left the paintbrush at the scene to further link the crime to Patsy. According to one speculative theory, John Ramsey meticulously wiped down evidence tied to himself and Burke, took a shower to eliminate traces, and disposed of his clothes, whilst ensuring Patsy's fingerprints, fibers, and presence remained untouched. The hypothesis suggests he denied her time to shower or change, thereby preserving evidence against her. The original plan was purportedly to dispose of JonBenét's remains in a suitcase, staging a kidnapping. However, calculating the personal risk of being seen, John may have pivoted. It is theorized he told Patsy the plan was too dangerous, convincing her to hide their daughter in the basement wine cellar instead. To muddy the investigation, he suggested inviting friends over, claiming their help was needed, but perhaps with the underlying motive of potentially framing them as intruders. Patsy, still trusting, is said to have complied, placing the ransom note on the floor while John showered. During the 5:52 a.m. emergency call, Burke reportedly emerged briefly asking, "What did you find?" which could be interpreted as revealing his knowledge of the situation before he was sent back to bed to maintain his alibi. In this scenario, John approved the flawed note, knowing its inconsistencies would point to Patsy, and insisted on an immediate police call, ensuring she remained unwashed to preserve incriminating evidence. As hours passed, and friends failed to find JonBenét, John, fearing the arrival of more police, discovered his daughter himself, carrying her upstairs in a manner that would further contaminate the scene. John's alibi was simple. He claimed to have slept all night, woken by Patsy's screams, and read the note, a story with minimal details to avoid contradictions. Burke's identical alibi required little coaching. Patsy, burdened with maintaining the narrative about the note and the timeline, contradicted herself often, as the theory suggests John intended. When asked for a writing sample from Patsy, John handed over the very notepad used for the ransom note, a move seen by some as deliberately implicating her. The intruder theory was a ruse, not to fool police long-term, but to manipulate Patsy. The plan, it is argued, succeeded beyond expectation. Aided by the initial handling of the case and District Attorney Alex Hunter's refusal to prosecute in 1999, despite the grand jury's indictment. Unidentified male DNA on JonBenét's clothing complicated the narrative, but did not derail the alleged scheme. Patsy, purportedly unaware of this manipulation, was framed as the central figure, while John remained protected. However, this hypothesis, that John orchestrated a complex cover-up to conceal prior harm by manipulating Patsy, raises serious questions when scrutinized. An analysis of the psychological feasibility, evidential contradictions, and practical challenges highlights the theory's potential shortcomings. Psychologically, the hypothesis demands that John, a successful businessman and father, possessed an almost sociopathic level of callousness. It posits he tampered with his daughter's remains, using Patsy's paintbrush to mask prior injuries, and framed his wife by exploiting her panic. While John is described as calm and strategic, no evidence suggests traits of antisocial personality disorder. A parent, even one seeking to hide wrongdoing, would likely struggle with such an act, which would require profound emotional detachment. His relationship with Patsy further complicates this narrative. They consistently presented a unified front, and her lack of suspicion towards him, even until her death in 2006, undermines the idea of such a deep betrayal. Evidential contradictions also weaken the hypothesis. The unidentified male DNA found on JonBenét's clothing and the garrote supports the intruder theory, and conflicts with the notion of John's complete control over the scene. A strategic planner would have anticipated the risk of such evidence. The ransom note is framed as a deliberate flaw to incriminate Patsy, yet a husband aiming to protect his family would more likely refine the note to avoid suspicion falling on them collectively. The practicality of the hypothesis is another weak point. It assumes John devised a sophisticated plan within hours, under extreme emotional distress. The plan's reliance on police focusing solely on Patsy was risky, as a slip from her or Burke could have implicated the entire family. Finally, the hypothesis lacks direct evidence. The autopsy findings do not conclusively link to John, and the DNA evidence leans toward an external perpetrator. The theory relies heavily on speculative interpretations. Ethically, John's history as a father who had already lost a daughter in a 1992 car accident suggests a man familiar with grief, more likely to protect his surviving family than to sacrifice them. This raises the profound question of whether a parent, even one concealing guilt, could act with such calculated cruelty. The JonBenét Ramsey case also hinges on a pivotal controversy. District Attorney Alex Hunter's 1999 decision to reject the grand jury's recommendation to indict John and Patsy Ramsey for child endangerment leading to a fatality and as an accessory to a crime. Alex Hunter was a seasoned prosecutor known for a cautious approach. As the key figure responsible for deciding whether to prosecute, Hunter oversaw the investigation, coordinating with multiple agencies while managing critical evidence. His decision sparked intense controversy. Described as mild-mannered, Hunter faced criticism for being overly lenient, with detractors arguing his hesitation reflected weakness or external pressures. In 1999, after over a year of deliberation, the grand jury voted to indict the Ramseys on serious charges. Shockingly, Hunter refused to sign the indictment, effectively halting prosecution. He concealed the grand jury's decision from the public, a move only revealed in 2013 when court documents were unsealed, prompting outrage. Hunter's rationale centered on the unidentified DNA evidence, which he believed weakened the case, making it unlikely to meet the beyond a reasonable doubt standard in court. He also reportedly feared a high-profile loss in court would damage his reputation and Boulder's image as a safe, affluent community. Critics, including investigators like Steve Thomas, accused Hunter of yielding to pressures from national media, local elites with ties to the Ramseys, and the family's powerful legal team, suggesting he prioritized his career over justice. Hunter's initial reluctance to convene the grand jury added to the controversy. It was only after Detective Steve Thomas resigned in 1998, publicly criticizing the investigation, and under pressure from an outraged public and Colorado's governor, that Hunter acted. Yet he limited the grand jury to considering lesser charges, avoiding murder counts to minimize the risk of a failed prosecution, a tactic seen by some as deflecting responsibility. Internal conflicts within his office further fueled debate, with some prosecutors and investigators like Thomas and Linda Arndt pushing for aggressive prosecution, while Hunter's allies favored caution. It was alleged he deliberately steered the grand jury toward a narrative more favorable to the Ramseys, supported by high-profile consultants, while tightly controlling the flow of information. FBI analysts, who dismissed the kidnapping theory and deemed the ransom note counterfeit, expressed frustration with Hunter's refusal to fully leverage their resources. Hunter's public statements added to the controversy. After the grand jury concluded, he vaguely claimed there was insufficient evidence to file charges, misleading the media. His enigmatic remark, "This case will be solved, just not today," was later dubbed a coward's excuse by critics. The 2013 revelation of the suppressed indictment intensified public distrust, with many labeling Hunter's actions a betrayal of justice. His failure to pursue early DNA analysis drew further criticism. When Mary Lacey, Hunter's successor, exonerated the Ramseys in 2008 based on DNA evidence, it underscored the contrast with Hunter's inaction. Though no evidence supports it, unsubstantiated online rumors have even suggested corruption or financial ties to the Ramseys, leaving the lingering question of where the power over justice truly resided in this case. This has led to a persistent debate over whether Hunter's caution was a prudent legal choice or a failure of accountability. Detective Linda Arndt never imagined that morning would leave her completely alone. For more than 3 hours, she stood as the sole representative of law enforcement inside the Ramsey home, a house filled with chaos and what she perceived as watchful eyes. Surrounded by friends and neighbors moving freely through what should have been a secured crime scene, Arndt knew she had lost control of the situation. In a desperate attempt to break the tension, she made a risky decision, asking John Ramsey and Fleet White to search the house for anything unusual. That decision would lead to a moment that would haunt her. John emerging from the basement carrying his daughter's remains. In the instant their eyes met, a deep, instinctive dread rose within her. Quietly, she placed her hand on her firearm, consciously aware of the 18 rounds she carried, bracing herself for any eventuality inside that house. Her isolation didn't end that morning. In the months and years that followed, Arndt became a scapegoat. The Boulder Police Department pointed fingers, blaming her for losing control of the investigation. Every decision she made that day was scrutinized and magnified as proof of incompetence. Linda Arndt became the lone woman left to carry the weight of a case she had seen clearly from the beginning. For years, she was portrayed as the lone voice of suspicion. But the truth is, she was never truly alone. Beneath the surface, a much larger network of doubt had already formed. Inside the Boulder Police Department, suspicion toward the Ramseys wasn't limited to Arndt. Dozens of detectives and investigators questioned the parents' behavior. Then there was the grand jury. 12 members who, after months of reviewing evidence, voted to indict both John and Patsy on charges related to child endangerment, leading to a fatality. Their decision, concealed by the district attorney, proved that Arndt's doubts were shared by those with legal authority. At least 7 prominent forensic experts and criminal investigators, including Michael Baden, James Kohler, and Werner Spitz, publicly voiced their suspicions. The media was relentless, with major networks and newspapers keeping their focus firmly on the Ramsey household. A 1999 CBS poll revealed that 52% of Americans believed the Ramseys were involved in their daughter's death, a figure representing millions of people. Even among those closest to the family, suspicion lingered, with at least 2 neighbors expressing doubts about their innocence. Linda Arndt may have stood alone in that living room, but she was far from alone in her suspicion. She was standing at the center of an invisible crowd, one made up of police officers, legal authorities, scientific experts, journalists, neighbors, and ordinary citizens. But there is a difference between suspicion and power. What she and all those others lacked was the legal authority to turn that suspicion into justice. In the end, after all the media storms and decades of speculation, Linda Arndt's voice remained unchanged, calm, steady, and certain. When asked if the person responsible would ever be charged or convicted, she replied, "No," affirming her belief that the person responsible for JonBenét's death would not face legal consequences. For her, it was never a question of doubt. She had been there, inside that house, and she had looked into their eyes, watched their movements, and heard every carefully crafted word. But her certainty was not enough. Linda Arndt was not a politician. She lacked the power to sway grand juries or manipulate public opinion. All she had was what she perceived to be the truth, and it seemed no one in a position of power was receptive. Today, she stands as a living reminder of what can happen when the system fails, when truth is not enough, and when justice becomes elusive. In the Anglo-American justice system, the standard for proving guilt in a homicide case is monumental, beyond a reasonable doubt. This means that if there is even a sliver of doubt, a defendant may be acquitted. The system is designed to prioritize preventing the conviction of an innocent person over ensuring a guilty person is convicted. This is why the JonBenét Ramsey case was arguably destined for a legal dead end from the outset. The evidence was largely circumstantial: behavioral clues, inconsistent stories, and suspicious actions. The unidentified male DNA found on JonBenét's clothing did not match anyone in her family, and that was enough for District Attorney Alex Hunter to step back. Even when the grand jury voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey for child endangerment leading to a fatality, their hands were tied. In Colorado, a grand jury can recommend charges, but only the district attorney can officially file them. Hunter had the final say, and he said no, using the DNA as his shield. He declared that without a clear match, there was not enough to move forward, creating just enough doubt to block prosecution. In the eyes of the law, it was not enough to prove guilt, but in the eyes of the world, it was more than enough to raise suspicion. In the world of high-profile cases involving children, few names draw more attention than Madeleine McCann and JonBenét Ramsey. Both cases involved young children from seemingly loving, upper-class families, and both were shrouded in suspicion. However, the McCanns and the Ramseys diverged in their response to that suspicion. When Madeleine McCann disappeared in Portugal, her parents became prime suspects almost immediately. Yet the McCanns remained cooperative. They stayed in Portugal for months, submitting to repeated police interviews and allowing searches without resistance, focused on one goal: finding their daughter. The Ramseys took a different path. From the very first hours, they adopted a strategy of controlled silence. They refused police interviews and denied investigators access to their son, Burke, for months. Rather than cooperating, they immediately hired an aggressive team of lawyers and public relations specialists. Their focus was on managing their image. They built a wall against media and investigators. The contrast is striking. One family chose transparency, the other chose control. The McCanns appeared willing to risk everything for the truth, while the Ramseys seemed more concerned with protecting something else entirely. Beyond the courtroom, something far more powerful was quietly working in the Ramseys' favor. Money. John Ramsey was the CEO of a major corporation, and they had the means to hire entire legal and PR teams within days of the incident. With money comes access and influence. The Ramseys were fixtures in Boulder's social circles, known and respected. Prosecuting a family like theirs would mean tearing through the fabric of Boulder itself. There was an unspoken fear of what a public trial could do to the city's reputation, its economy, and its sense of security. A fear that justice might come at a price no one in Boulder was willing to pay. In the end, that fear may have been enough. For District Attorney Alex Hunter, the risks were enormous. A failed prosecution would have been a catastrophic political disaster. There was an unspoken terror among Boulder's leadership about what a public trial would unleash, exposing every social tie and uncomfortable connection between the Ramseys and the city's power structure. The city's pristine image would be shattered. And so, a decision may have been made not in courtrooms, but in quiet meetings. Protect the city. Protect the system, even if it meant letting go of the truth. This was never just a homicide case. It became a permanent stain on the American justice system, revealing how power and wealth can influence the foundations of law and order. Linda Arndt became a symbol of every honest voice drowned out by politics and fear. The Ramseys won long before the first headline was printed, with their wealth, their status, and their mastery over the media, burying the truth beneath a mountain of carefully orchestrated doubt. Justice was not defeated by a lack of evidence. It was, some argue, defeated by design. The lessons buried in this case are unsettling. The loudest cries are not always the cries of the innocent. Performance can be confused with sincerity. Headlines and news reports are filtered through unseen hands with hidden agendas. And justice does not always belong to those who deserve it. It can be a commodity, bought and shaped by those with enough power to bend the system to their will. The JonBenét Ramsey case also offers profound lessons about the perils of premature judgment. The decision to withhold the grand jury's indictment underscores the danger of misplaced blame. Accusing the Ramseys without conclusive evidence risked compounding the grief of parents who had already lost one child and were battling a serious illness. Conversely, if the Ramseys were complicit, the case raises unsettling questions about parental responsibility. The case's ambiguity, bolstered by Hunter's inaction, leaves us grappling with the balance between justice and compassion. It compels us to weigh the consequences of blame against the pursuit of truth. As the dust settles, yet never truly clears, we are left staring into the void of this unresolved tragedy. After examining the evidence, the missteps, and the impenetrable walls built by power and wealth, how does this story sit with you? Does it shake your faith in the justice system, or reinforce the immense difficulty of proving guilt beyond all doubt? When you consider the life that was lost and the lives that were forever changed, what is the one question that echoes loudest in your mind, demanding an answer that may never come? Thanks for watching. How do you feel about these arguments and theories? Does it give you a different perspective on the case? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to receive the latest notifications.